My parents disowned me for their favorite child until my secret success exposed them. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The woman wiping nervous sweat from her forehead in my waiting room was my mother, and she had no idea I was the CEO, holding her execution papers. Standing behind the one-way glass of my private office, I watched Eleanor fidget with the strap of her counterfeit designer handbag. Next to her sat my older brother, Chase. He was 33 now, still wearing that same arrogant smirk, though the heavy dark circles under his eyes betrayed the panic he was trying so desperately to hide. They were here at my firm to beg for a $3 million emergency bailout. They thought they were meeting an anonymous private equity billionaire. They thought this was their final, saving lifeline before the banks swooped in and seized absolutely everything they owned. For a decade, I had been a total ghost to them. They hadn't seen my face since the day they threw me out on the street with nothing but a black trash bag full of my clothes. Now, they were sitting in the lobby of a sleek skyscraper I owned, drinking the expensive sparkling water my assistant had poured them, completely oblivious to the fact that their absolute worst nightmare was standing just a few feet away. How much does a mother's love actually cost? For Eleanor, it was precisely the amount of my entire college savings, which she happily drained to fund Chase's delusions. I watched Chase aggressively tap his expensive leather shoe against the Italian marble floor. He leaned over and whispered something urgent to my mother, and she nodded frantically, patting his knee with that sickening, enabling devotion I remembered so vividly from our childhood. They were about to lose the family home. The fake empire Chase had built out of maxed-out credit cards and forged documents was finally collapsing in on itself, and they were utterly desperate. My business partner, Marcus, stepped up beside me, holding a thick manila folder containing the forensic audit of Chase's fraudulent company. "You ready for this, Henry?" Marcus asked, his voice low and incredibly steady. "They're expecting a miracle today." I traced my finger along the cool glass, my eyes locked on the brother who had stolen my life and the mother who had gladly let him do it. "Let them hope," I replied softly. "Hope makes the fall hurt a lot more." I adjusted my tie, feeling the heavy, cold weight of the financial receipts tucked neatly into my jacket pocket. I turned away from the glass to finally go and face my ghosts. To understand how we ended up on opposite sides of this boardroom glass, you have to understand the suffocating dynamic of our childhood home. In my mother's eyes, Chase was a flawless prodigy sent from heaven, while I was simply the permanent disappointment taking up space. It was the textbook definition of the golden child syndrome, but on a scale that constantly eroded my sanity. If Chase brought home a C on his report card, Eleanor would storm into the school and scream at the teacher for failing to recognize his unique genius. If I brought home a B, I was grounded for 2 weeks for being hopelessly lazy and ungrateful. The disparity wasn't just emotional, it was entirely financial. When Chase turned 16, a brand new sports car magically appeared in the driveway with a massive red bow on it. When I turned 16, I was handed a stack of bus passes and told to go find a job at the local grocery store. I vividly remember the summer I saved up $2,000 from bagging groceries to buy a used laptop for school. Chase casually backed his shiny new car into a brick wall because he was texting a girl. Instead of making him pay for it, my parents quietly went into my room, took the cash envelope from my drawer, and used my hard-earned money to pay his deductible. When I confronted them, crying in pure frustration, Eleanor just rolled her eyes at me. "Henry, stop being so incredibly selfish," she sighed, brushing past me. "Your brother has an image to maintain at school. You don't need a computer anyway." That was the core operating system of our family. Chase's superficial image was always vastly more important than my actual survival. I learned to keep my head down, quietly earning top grades while Chase partied his way through high school, racking up disciplinary infractions that my parents happily paid to sweep under the rug. I thought if I just worked hard enough, they would finally see my worth. I just never expected her to completely erase my future to fund his. The day my world completely shattered started out like any other boring Tuesday, until I checked my bank account and saw a zero. This wasn't just my checking account. It was the joint savings account where my grandparents had deposited my college tuition and where I had meticulously saved every paycheck since I was 15. Over $60,000 had completely vanished overnight. I sprinted into the living room, my heart pounding against my ribs like a jackhammer, only to find Eleanor and my father popping a bottle of cheap champagne with Chase. What happened to my account? I demanded, my voice cracking in panic. Chase just smirked, swirling the drink in his glass. Eleanor didn't even look guilty. She set her glass down and gave me that condescending, pitiful look she always reserved for me. Henry, calm down and stop making a scene, she said smoothly. Chase is launching a revolutionary tech startup, and he needed seed money. We transferred your funds to his business account this morning. It's an investment in this family's future. I couldn't breathe. My entire future, my escape plan, the degree I had bled for, stolen to fund a phantom company for a guy who couldn't even pass basic algebra. That was my money. I screamed, the sheer injustice breaking something deep inside me. He's going to blow it all, and you know it. My father, who usually stayed silent, finally stood up, his face red with sudden rage. Do not speak to your brother that way, he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. He is a visionary. You have always been nothing but jealous of his potential. If you can't support your own flesh and blood, then you have no place in this house. I stared at the three of them, realizing with horrifying clarity that I was never a son to them. I was just a spare resource to be harvested. They handed me a single black trash bag and gave me exactly 10 minutes to pack my life. The front door slammed shut, and my new, terrifying reality officially began. The brutal reality of being completely disowned and cut off at 20 years old is something you can never fully prepare for. The first few months were a living nightmare of agonizing hunger and suffocating loneliness. With my college dreams instantly vaporized by my mother's theft, I had to drop out of university and focus entirely on sheer survival. I spent my nights sleeping on a stained, lumpy couch in a cramped apartment belonging to a guy I barely knew from my old chemistry class. By day, I was grinding through a merciless schedule, working 3 completely different minimum wage jobs just to keep my head above water. I opened up a coffee shop at 4 in the morning, hauled heavy boxes in a sweltering warehouse all afternoon, and washed dishes in a busy downtown restaurant until midnight. The physical exhaustion was absolutely brutal, but the emotional betrayal was a heavy, dark anchor dragging me down. I had no safety net, no family to call on holidays, and absolutely zero room for error. But in that crushing darkness, my sheer anger mutated into a relentless, burning obsession to succeed. It was during a late-night shift at the restaurant that everything changed. I noticed a regular customer, a sharp-dressed man named Marcus, struggling with a massive spreadsheet on his laptop while waiting for his steak. I wiped off the table next to him, glanced at his screen, and casually pointed out a critical macro error that was throwing off his entire financial model. Marcus stopped, looked at the greasy dish towel in my hand, and then looked back at my face with intense curiosity. We started talking. He was a seasoned venture capitalist, and he couldn't believe a kid washing dishes understood complex financial modeling better than his junior analysts. Over the next few weeks, I began helping him crunch numbers during my precious 15-minute breaks. He saw the fierce, unyielding drive in my eyes, and he recognized a hunger that cannot be taught in business school. He handed me his business card and changed the trajectory of my life. Building an empire in absolute silence requires a level of discipline that borders on actual insanity. After Marcus hired me as an entry-level analyst at his firm, I attacked the job with a terrifying, singular focus. I wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. I was working to completely obliterate the version of me that my family thought was weak. Within 2 years, I was managing his largest portfolios. By 25, Marcus and I spun off to start our own private equity firm, Apex Capital. We specialized in acquiring distressed assets, restructuring them with brutal efficiency, and flipping them for massive profits. I worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping under my desk, and living on stale coffee and pure spite. When I hit my first $1 million in net worth, I didn't celebrate, I didn't buy a fancy car, and I certainly didn't post about it online. In fact, I remained a total ghost. I deleted every social media account I ever had, ensuring that my name and face never appeared in our corporate press releases. I let Marcus act as the public face of the company while I remained the silent, ruthless architect operating deeply in the shadows. I knew that if Eleanor or Chase ever caught a tiny glimpse of my wealth, they would instantly try to claw their way back into my life, claiming they always believed in me. So, I lived modestly, wore plain clothes, and quietly amassed a fortune that eclipsed my family's wildest, most greedy dreams. As our firm grew from managing millions to hundreds of millions, the childhood scars began to slowly callous over, replaced by a cold, calculating armor. I bought my own penthouse, built a chosen family of loyal friends, and watched my bank accounts swell with quiet satisfaction. I was patiently waiting, knowing that time was always the ultimate equalizer. My revenge wouldn't be loud, but it would be absolutely devastating. While I was quietly conquering the corporate world, Cousin Maya remained my only tenuous link to the toxic swamp of my past. Maya was the only relative who reached out after my parents threw me away, and over the years, we met for secretive, quiet coffees. Through her, I received regular, infuriating updates on the grand illusion of chase. According to his highly curated social media feeds, my brother was a visionary tech mogul living a life of unimaginable luxury. Maya would slide her phone across the cafe table, showing me pictures of Chase posing casually against a rented Ferrari or clinking champagne glasses on a yacht in Miami. He wore $1,000 suits and constantly posted ridiculous, empty motivational quotes about grinding and self-made success. But Maya knew the dark truth behind the glittering facade. "It's all entirely fake, Henry," she told me one afternoon, stirring her latte with a heavy sigh. "That startup he stole your college fund for? It went totally bankrupt in 6 months. He's on his 4th company now." I stared at the photo of Eleanor commenting a string of heart emojis under Chase's post, praising her brilliant son. "How is he paying for the lifestyle, Maya?" I asked, leaning closer. She looked around nervously before dropping the bomb. "Your parents. They quietly remortgaged the family house twice to cover his massive business debts. Aunt Eleanor refuses to let him look like a failure to the country club women. They are literally drowning to keep his Instagram looking rich." A bitter, cold laugh escaped my lips. My parents had sacrificed their own retirement, their home, and my entire future just to prop up a narcissist who was bleeding them completely dry. They were choosing financial suicide just to maintain the absolute delusion of his perfection. The golden child was building a castle made entirely out of sand. The universe has an incredibly ironic way of delivering karma when you finally stop actively looking for it. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 10 years after the day I was violently kicked out of my home. I was sitting at my massive mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly projections, when Marcus walked in and dropped a thick, red tab file directly onto my keyboard. "Take a close look at this one," Marcus said, crossing his arms and leaning against the doorframe. "It's a local logistics company. They're begging for an emergency buyout. They need $3 million in liquid cash by Friday, or they're looking at involuntary bankruptcy and severe criminal liability for unpaid taxes." I sighed, picking up the heavy folder and flipping to the executive summary. Distressed companies were our bread and butter, but Marcus usually vetted them before bringing them to my desk. "Why are you fast-tracking a messy local deal?" I asked, scanning the terrible profit and loss statements. Then, my eyes hit the bottom of the page, landing directly on the official LLC ownership registry. My heart completely stopped in my chest. The CEO listed was Chase. The primary financial guarantors listed underneath him were Eleanor and my father. The address was my childhood home. I stared at the names, the black ink burning into my retinas. The visionary tech mogul was running a failing logistics scam, and he had dragged my parents down into the crushing depths of his ruin. They had blindly approached Apex Capital, desperate for a savior, completely unaware of who actually owned the firm. The oxygen seemed to vanish from my sprawling office as a slow, dangerous smile finally crept across my face. The predator had just unknowingly crawled right into the spider's web. I told Marcus to officially accept their initial pitch, but under the strict condition of absolute anonymity regarding the firm's ultimate ownership. "Tell them the senior partner wants to conduct a deeply rigorous, private audit before signing a single check," I instructed, my voice icy. For the next 72 hours, I locked myself in my office, fueled by black coffee and a decade of suppressed rage. I didn't just review their provided financial statements. I hired our best forensic accountants to tear into the very fabric of Chase's miserable existence. What I uncovered was far worse than mere incompetence or bad luck. Chase wasn't just failing at business. He was actively, maliciously draining every account he could touch. I found a massive, horrifying trail of secret cash advances, hidden offshore accounts in the Caymans, and extreme gambling debts totaling over $1 million. But the absolute worst discovery was sitting in a file labeled secondary liens. Chase had secretly taken out a massive, predatory loan against my parents' house, and to do it, he had clearly forged Eleanor's signature. I stared at the falsified documents on my glowing monitors, feeling a strange mix of deep horror and extreme, vindicating clarity. My mother had given up her life savings, her home, and her youngest son to protect a man who was knowingly leading her to the slaughterhouse. If this company collapsed on Friday, Chase wouldn't just face bankruptcy. He would likely face federal prison time for wire fraud and forgery. They were begging me for a bailout, but what they actually needed was a miracle to keep the handcuffs off their golden boy. My brother wasn't just a failure. He was a straight-up criminal. The first preliminary meeting was scheduled for Wednesday morning, and I orchestrated the entire thing like a theater director plotting a tragedy. I stayed safely locked inside my private office, wearing noise-canceling headphones connected directly to the hidden microphones inside our secondary conference room. Marcus, playing the role of the stern, demanding senior partner, sat at the head of the long table to meet with my family. Through the crystal-clear audio feed, I heard the familiar, grating sound of Chase's arrogant voice. He was actually trying to aggressively pitch Marcus, spinning a ridiculous web of lies about temporary cash flow hiccups and exponential market scaling. The fundamentals of the business are incredibly strong, Marcus, Chase boasted confidently. We just need a bridge loan to clear some minor vendor disputes. You're looking at a 10x return in 12 months. I literally scoffed out loud in my empty office. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus, bless his ruthless heart, didn't give an inch. Your accounts payable show you are profoundly insolvent, Chase. You owe the IRS $600,000. Marcus fired back cleanly. Then, I heard Eleanor chime in, her voice dripping with that familiar, frantic defense mechanism. My son is a brilliant entrepreneur, sir. The market just hasn't caught up to his incredible vision yet. We are willing to personally guarantee the loan. I closed my eyes, shaking my head at the tragic irony of her absolute blindness. She was offering to guarantee a loan with a house that Chase had already secretly mortgaged into oblivion. They were sitting in my building, lying to my partner, begging for my money to save their miserable, fake lives. They had no idea they were enthusiastically digging their own financial graves. After listening to an hour of Chase's pathetic, transparent lies, I hit the small button on my desk phone to message Marcus. Tell them we will fund the $3 million. But the final term sheet must be signed in person tomorrow. All guarantors present. I listened as Marcus smoothly relayed the offer to the desperate trio in the conference room. I heard my mother literally burst into tears of joy, loudly praising God and kissing Chase's cheek. I told you, Mom. I always pull through. Chase bragged loudly, completely taking credit for the lifeline I was dangling in front of his face. The meeting ended, and Marcus walked back into my office, dropping his notepad on my desk with a heavy, dramatic sigh. They are the most utterly delusional people I have ever met in my entire career, Marcus muttered, pouring himself a bourbon. They are coming back tomorrow at noon to sign the final papers. I spent that entire evening pacing the hardwood floors of my empty penthouse, my mind a swirling hurricane of anxiety and anticipation. The boy they threw away a decade ago was screaming for validation, but the ruthless CEO had become demanded absolute, cold justice. I prepared the documents, meticulously highlighting every single forged signature and hidden gambling debt in bright, undeniable neon yellow. I wasn't just going to deny them the money. I was going to surgically dismantle the golden pedestal Eleanor had built for him. The emotional toll of preparing to look my mother in the eyes after 10 years of absolute silence was terrifyingly heavy. The decade of absolute silence was finally about to be broken. At exactly noon on Thursday, the receptionist confirmed that the family had arrived and were waiting in the primary boardroom. I stood up, straightened my tailored Tom Ford suit, and took a long, steadying breath that felt like inhaling pure ice. Walking down the long glass hallway, I could hear Chase's booming voice echoing through the heavy doors, bragging to my parents about his negotiation skills. I pushed open the double oak doors, and stepped quietly into the massive, sunlit room. Eleanor, Chase, and my father were sitting on one side of the long mahogany table, smiling brightly at Marcus, who was standing quietly near the projector. They didn't even look up at me when I entered, assuming I was just a random assistant bringing in the coffee or the final paperwork. I walked slowly to the head of the table and sat directly in the leather CEO chair. Silence stretched for 3 incredibly agonizing seconds. My father looked up first, his eyes narrowing in confusion as he tried to place my face. Then, Eleanor turned her head, her polite, fake smile instantly freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The color drained from her cheeks so fast she looked physically ill, her hands trembling violently as she dropped her expensive pen onto the table. "Henry," she whispered, the name catching sharply in her dry throat, as if she were looking at a literal ghost. Chase's arrogant smirk slowly melted off his face, replaced by a look of profound, terrified confusion as he looked from me to the massive Apex Capital logo on the wall. My mother gasped as all the color instantly drained from her face. The silence in the room was so thick and heavy you could have carved it with a butcher knife. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together, and let them silently drown in the agonizing realization of exactly who they were begging. "Hello, Mother." "Hello, Chase," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Welcome to my firm." For a moment, the absolute shock paralyzed them, but then the deeply ingrained entitlement forcefully kicked back in. Eleanor, recovering from her initial horror, suddenly sat up straight and slammed her hand on the table. Instead of apologizing for a decade of abandonment, she immediately pivoted to aggressive demands. "You," she scoffed, her voice shaking with desperate anger. "You're the CEO? Well, then this makes everything incredibly simple. Sign the check, Henry. Your brother needs this money today, and you owe this family for everything we did for you." I actually laughed out loud, a harsh, cold sound that echoed loudly against the glass walls. Chase puffed out his chest, leaning aggressively across the table. "Yeah, little bro, quit playing these stupid power games. Transfer the funds so we can get back to running my real business." They showed absolutely zero remorse, zero hesitation, and zero shame for stealing my college fund and throwing me onto the streets like garbage. They simply assumed that because we shared blood, I was obligated to be their personal, unlimited ATM to fix their catastrophic failures. They still thought I was the exact same weak boy they discarded. I stopped laughing, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees as I picked up a remote and clicked a button. The projector hummed to life, casting a massive, glowing spreadsheet onto the wall directly behind me. "I'm not giving you a single dime, Chase," I said softly, watching his face instantly pale. "But I am going to show Eleanor exactly what she sacrificed my entire life to pay for." I clicked to the first slide. It showed the massive transfers from the company account directly to offshore gambling websites, totaling over $1 million. Eleanor squinted at the screen, shaking her head in denial. "What is this? Henry, stop lying to make him look bad," she yelled. I clicked to the next slide, completely ignoring her outburst. "This is the secondary mortgage on your house, Mother. The one taken out 6 months ago." I zoomed in heavily on the signature line. "And this is the forensic analysis proving Chase blatantly forged your signature to secure it. You don't just owe the IRS, Eleanor. The bank is foreclosing on your home on Monday." The room completely erupted. Chase jumped out of his chair, his face violently red, screaming that I had fabricated the documents to ruin his life. But my father, who had been deathly silent, finally grabbed the physical packet I slid across the table, his eyes rapidly scanning the undeniable bank seals. "He's telling the truth, Eleanor," my father whispered, his voice cracking as he looked at his golden boy with absolute, terrifying disgust. I watched the golden illusion shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The implosion was instantaneous, violent, and incredibly satisfying to witness from the safety of my side of the table. Eleanor burst into loud, hysterical sobs, burying her face in her hands as the crushing reality of her absolute ruin finally hit her. She had sacrificed her innocent son to protect a fraud, and now the fraud had successfully stolen everything she had left. Chase, backed entirely into a corner, turned completely vicious. "You little piece of trash," he screamed, lunging across the table to try and grab me by the collar of my suit. Before he could even get close, Marcus stepped smoothly in front of him, and the heavy boardroom doors swung open to reveal two massive security guards. "Remove them from my building," I commanded coldly, not even flinching at Chase's pathetic attempt at physical intimidation. As the guards grabbed Chase by the arms, he thrashed wildly, screaming curses at me, demanding I give him the money he deserved. My father slowly stood up, looking older and more broken than I had ever seen him, and refused to even look at my mother as he walked out. Eleanor lingered at the door, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks, reaching a shaking hand out toward me. "Henry, please," she choked out, her eyes pleading for the mercy she never once showed me. "You can't just let us lose our home." I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, empty pity. "You lost your home 10 years ago, Eleanor, when you threw me out of it." The heavy oak doors closed, locking my toxic past out forever. In the massive, echoing aftermath of that meeting, the dominoes fell exactly as the forensic audit had predicted. By Monday, the bank officially foreclosed on my parents' house, and they were forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. A week later, the federal authorities indicted Chase for multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and forging legal documents. He is currently awaiting trial, and his beloved, highly curated social media accounts have been completely abandoned. Eleanor occasionally tries to call my office, leaving tearful, desperate voicemails begging for a second chance at a relationship, but my assistant deletes them immediately. I paid a heavy emotional price to get here, carrying the deep scars of their rejection, but dropping that hammer gave me the ultimate closure I needed. I spent years in therapy learning that family isn't determined by blood. It's determined by absolute loyalty, mutual respect, and genuine love. I now spend my holidays surrounded by my chosen family, Marcus, Maya, and friends who value me for my character, not my bank account. If you are the black sheep or the scapegoat of your family, struggling in the dark while the golden child gets everything, do not despair. Use their doubt as absolute fuel. Build your own empire in silence, and never let anyone convince you that you are obligated to save your abusers. Sometimes the best way to win the game is to own the board.